Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland Sunday Morning Community Forum. And without hesitation, let's proceed. We have an excellent program today. And to introduce our speaker, we have Jean Martin. Jean?
Thanks, Wayne. My name is Jean Martin. I'm pleased to welcome you to this series. It's a weekly Sunday series of presentations and discussions that feature important issues that affect our lives. A few housekeeping notes. The forum is being recorded. It will be available on our website, which is uucleveland.org. We'll have a Q&A session after the speaker's remarks. To share your questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or it may be on the top for tablets and mobile devices. Our topic today couldn't be more timely. Crisis in journalism, democracy, and the facts. Democracy requires enlightened citizens. However, with traditional sources like newspapers declining, consumers face a new media landscape, often peppered with political division from television and social media. Moral clarity and truth are the basis of journalism. Are journalists obligated to report both sides of an issue when clearly one side is a lie? How do consumers know how to distinguish the facts? How can we ensure public accountability and avoid government corruption? What role did journalism play in this week's election? Our speaker is columnist Brent Larkin, one of Cleveland's most respected and influential journalists. His columns irritate some, are praised by others, and they are never boring. Larkin's journalistic mission is to spark heated verbal debates in neighborhood bars and inspire passionate discussions in coffee shops. Politicians have been known to read his columns even before they turn to the sports pages. At the very least, he wants readers to think about issues. A graduate of Brush High School and Ohio University, Larkin joined the Cleveland Press in 1970 and soon started covering City Hall and politics. He covered the same beats after coming to the Plain Dealer in 1981. From 1991 until his retirement in 2009, he was director of the Plain Dealer's editorial page, and now he writes columns for Cleveland.com. He loves Cleveland and never wants to leave. We are lucky to have him. I give you Brent Larkin.
Thanks. I'm not too. I do appreciate it, Jean. I'm not sure I deserve it, and I've never done this before, as I've told a few of you a few minutes ago. So I will try and look at my computer as much as possible. Yesterday, it seems to me, was for some people one of those days that you will remember for the rest of your life. And I don't mean to suggest it was anywhere near even a fraction as important as remembering where we were in 11th grade Spanish class on that day in 1963, or where we were on September 11th, the morning of September 11th. But for a lot of people, yesterday was a really important and symbolic day. And I think that was manifested in part by the spontaneous, without much social distancing, I guess, demonstrations that we saw on this that seemed to be entirely peaceful in Philadelphia and New York and Washington and Atlanta, and they seem to be pretty joyous occasions. And personally, I found that a pretty stark contrast to these festivals of hate that we would see at these so-called rallies that we've seen actually for 5 or 6 years now in this country, where people some with legitimate and others perhaps not so legitimate grievances gathered to chant. Last week they were chanting to lock up LeBron James. I'm not sure if you saw that one, but to lock up people who have been indicted for or charged with no crimes against America or its government. So that it struck me yesterday as a pretty important day, especially if you consider that. Let's go back to February 11th of this year, which is, I'm not going to use my fingers, but I think it's a little bit less than 9 months ago. And in the New Hampshire primary on that day, excuse me, Joe Biden got 8.4% of the vote. And he was clobbered by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Pete Buttigieg. And who would have imagined on that Tuesday night that we would be sitting here today about Joe Biden being the president-elect. It's also kind of fitting, isn't it, that when all this was happening yesterday, when Biden became president-elect, the existing president was on the golf course, where he has been. During his campaign, he rarely did a rally go by where he wasn't critical of Obama for playing golf too much. Well, yesterday was the president's 209th day during his presidency of playing golf, which is precisely 104 more than Obama played during his first 4 years. So we also can't, another thing that I think it's even more important to not lose sight of is that 74 million people voted for Joe Biden on November 3rd. 70 million, more than 70 million people voted, almost 48 out of 100 voted for Donald Trump. And this is in a nation where a few weeks ago, the Columbia University study suggested that the incumbent president was likely responsible in part for the death of 130,000 Americans from the coronavirus. And excuse me again, but the fact that he got so many votes is something that I have a hard time getting my head around. But it seems to me it's probably symbolic of what lies ahead for this country. I am of the school of thought that a second Trump term could have ripped at the shreds of democracy, the fabric of democracy, to the point where it becomes unrecognizable. And I think Joe Biden's election offers a ray of hope that things can get better in this country. But we are still a very divided country, and the election showed that in many ways, this was, well, not in many ways, that this was hardly a Democratic mandate. They lost seats in the Ohio House where they expected to gain, and it looks like, it's fair to assume it's a real long shot that they're going to take control of the Senate. And this is probably remains a center, maybe even a little bit of a center-right country. And we have there's still a potential for a lot of mischief in the days and months ahead. And I'm not overly optimistic. However, the world's reaction to what happened in this country yesterday should be something that Republicans pay attention to. I see that Netanyahu this morning warmly congratulated Biden on his victory and said he looked forward to working with him. And I think I think the symbolism of that is also, excuse me, is also pretty important. This whole Trump thing is, I have never, aside from 1984, when, as this is a very informed group, I'm aware of that. As you know, John Glenn ran for president in 1984. The plain dealer in that year committed a lot of resources to covering the presidential campaign. I spent 11 months on the plain dealer's dime. I visited 21 states, and that's my career, so-called career in journalism, has never been devoted to covering national politics. That changed in 2015 when he came down that escalator and branded an entire nation rapist. And if you remember the debate, the first debate of that campaign was at Quicken Loans Arena. And afterwards, he ascribed Megyn Kelly's tough questioning to the fact that, quote, she was bleeding or whatever. And I have always found that Donald Trump represents, and I still believe, everything bad about America, and that he is essentially a hideous human being who has literally no redeeming qualities. So I have been in as Gene mentioned, I've written a lot about him in the last 4 years, and I have gotten more, let's call it, unfavorable emails than I've ever gotten on anything in my life. The Trump supporters are vocal, they're not bashful, and they don't like me. But that's, that's neither here nor there. I'm not running, that's not a popularity contest. But somebody mentioned that what I wrote this morning about Ohio, and that is something that I have a little bit of familiarity with. And Ohio became a lost cause in this election, at least for the foreseeable future, because the polls told us that Ohio was a toss-up. The Democrats told us that they had a chance, that Biden had a chance to win Ohio. Somebody convinced Biden to waste his precious time by flying to Berkeley Crun Airport on Monday in an attempt to seal the deal. And of course, we found out that Biden lost Ohio by almost precisely the same percentage, 8 points, that Hillary Clinton lost it 4 years ago. And and I wrote this morning that Ohio has a lot more in common in presidential elections now with Missouri than it does with Michigan. And all these towns along the Ohio River, the eastern part of the state and the southern part, which used to be bright blue counties, have gradually turned red over the past 15 years. And places like Cleveland or Greater Cleveland have gotten smaller. And as a result, Ohio's turned redder. The most reliable Democratic vote, I would suggest, in Ohio now can now be found in Franklin County rather than Cuyahoga, in part because it's a lot larger county now. And I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. And you found it in Ohio House races. County commissioners across the state, Democratic incumbents got beat. And the blue wave just never washed up on the shores of Lake Erie or anywhere else in Ohio, because it was a pretty disappointing. If you're a Democrat, you should be pretty disappointed in what happened here. And I think a tiny fraction of it is that that the state Democratic Party hasn't had the right leadership of it, but mostly it's a demographic thing. In Ohio's educational attainment level is below that of Pennsylvania and Michigan. And the most reliable indicator of where white voters are going and have gone in the last two presidential elections has been educational attainment. And that was true again last Tuesday. And it's a big problem in Ohio. And I'm not sure how I do think that Mike DeWine realizes it. Mike DeWine, by the way, DeWine and Rob Portman were the two luckiest politicians in Ohio on Tuesday, because they did not want to run in the sixth year of a Trump presidency, when he would, if possible, he would be more unpopular than he is in 2 years than he is today. And history tells us that would have been a problem for them. So I'm not suggesting they voted for Joe Biden, but they're not going to lose any sleep over the fact that Joe Biden is now the president-elect. I probably talked a little too fast. Is there any? But I'll sit here all morning and answer questions, Gene, if there's any that have popped up on your screen. Is anyone there? Okay, there you are.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brent. Your comments are always thought-provoking, and we really appreciate your insights on the election. We will move to the Q&A program portion. As I said before, use the button that's on the bottom of your screen, or it might be on the top of your screen if you have a tablet or a mobile device. Also, add your name and email to our weekly notification list if you're not already on our list. Use the chat button for us, and also tell us how you heard about the forum. So I'll turn the Q&A over to Debbie Wright. Debbie, are you there?
Yes, there's two options for asking questions. I already have a couple questions in the Q&A, but we do have a second option, which is if you'd like to raise your hand, we will occasionally ask live audience questions also. But you need to use that raise your hand button, and one of the forum people will open you up and put you as a panelist to ask that question. But we have some good questions in our Q&A. So let's start with this first one. Fox News is reportedly the most watched cable news network. When it comes to spreading information and igniting hatred, it seems to be the elephant in the room, especially with regard to the evening commentators. What can be done?
Well, nothing should be done by the government. I mean, Fox News has a right to exist. It has. Now, they have gigantic numbers. However, I would note that, remember, it is the only reliably conservative network, correct? And whereas the left-leaning CNN, you have CNN and MSNBC, and they are vying for, they're carving up that part of the audience. So that accounts for part of the big numbers that Fox pulls down. I personally am of the opinion that Rupert Murdoch and Fox News have done more damage to United States of America than any 10 senators could do, because facts don't matter on Fox News at night. the exception of course, of Chris Wallace and a couple others. And they have proven to be just as willing to peddle false narratives and conspiracy theories and lies, almost as willing as the president. And I did note a story this morning that, what's her name? Jean Pirro, is that the president, one of his favorites, that her show may have been suspended last night because she wanted to advance some, like somebody saw an elephant voting in Philadelphia or something like that, some crazy, unsupportable theory. But I think they've done a lot of damage, but it's not the government's role to interfere with their First Amendment rights to the airways are regulated somewhat in some ways, but nothing could be done as far as I'm concerned.
Well, this is a little editorial on my part about this, but if you watch Fox News, even, they have a cheerful attitude about the news. They have fun things. You watch NBC, MSNBC, and all it is complaints. You watch public TV news, PBS, and it's so serious. There's something about the cheeriness of Fox News that could be compelling if you didn't know that they were peddling lies between the cheerfulness. So on my part about how can you get people to watch news if you want to be cheered up?
Are those, and I asked this out of ignorance, are those three talents that they have on at night in prime time or night, are they cheery? I never thought of Sean Hannity being cheery.
Well, you step back and watch the overall arc of their news. It's serious with some cheerfulness in it. Plus, it's those sexy legs, right? You wonder how those women can function with their legs crossed the way they are. Question for you. Should we bring back the Fairness Doctrine? Could we even bring it back?
No, I don't know, but that's my short answer, but I'm not. I would say the answer to no.
Was the Fairness Doctrine existed because there was more government control over the airwaves? Or was it all voluntary?
I don't know. It's a good question.
So the next one is, I'm trying hard to understand people who voted for Trump. I can't believe they are bad people. What do you think is motivating them, and how can we reach out to them?
I have been guilty at times of almost wading into the stereotype game with the Trump voters. And I honestly do think it's a mistake to go there. I think it's a mixed bag of, people who voted for Joe Biden come from different walks of life and have different reasons for why they voted for him. There are a lot of people who legitimately feel marginalized, and their grievances and their are very real. There's also a segment of the Trump vote is white grievance and fear of people who look different. You notice Trump's message when he was managed to stay on point, which is very rare in the final 2 weeks, was a lot about protecting the suburbs. You heard him talk about protecting the suburbs a lot. Well, we know what he was talking about when he said that. I think history will show that Trump was communicated and motivated a segment of the electorate very effectively, but in terms of his political skills, I think they were not, in this campaign, history will not be kind to him. He never tried to expand his base. If he had just pretended like he cared about all those people who were dying, because we know he doesn't care, that he would have been reelected. If he would have done, again, pretended like he cared about the virus and pretended that he was doing something, I think he would have been reelected. And I think he may have been reelected handily.
Right.
And that, as frightening as that may be, I do believe it.
Yeah. Well, I know my 401k hasn't suffered much through the Trump years as an
No, it has not. No.
So in 2016, Trump was endorsed by only one newspaper, yet he won. Do newspaper endorsements matter anymore? Do people even read newspapers?
Well,
I do.
I really should note, and it's important, I don't speak for the Plain Dealer. I'm not an employee of the Plain Dealer. Plain Dealer has been extraordinarily good to me and continues to be. Having said all that, well, the numbers speak for themselves, and the newspaper circulation is declining everywhere except, maybe with the three big papers in this country, the Wall Street Journal, the Times, and Donald Trump has been very good for business at the New York Times and the Washington Post. And to me, they are the two greatest newspapers in the country. It's not even close. But yeah, big regional newspapers are suffering, and ad revenue continues to decline. I suspect, I don't know, and it's going to digit, and that's why Cleveland.com exists, to try and to give readers an outlet for the same content that they have in print. And that is apparently a big part of Cleveland.com's future. But it's a tough slog, and I guess the pandemic has not helped. There are days when you pick up the paper, but for Ganley.
That's what I was thinking. I need to buy their car,
Yeah, we should. All Plain Dealer people who should go buy a car. Certainly, they own a lot of dealerships.
I did. My last car was
Well,
an
thank
Outback.
you. But the Plain Dealers had gone through a pretty tough stretch in the last year. But I have also heard, and I'm that revenues have picked up a bit of late. I don't know that, but I've heard it. Was there another part to that question that I?
Well, does anybody read them? But I do have another.
Sure, but not, the numbers are not as good as they used to be.
Right.
When
So
the
where is
Plain,
journalism headed?
when the Plain Dealer bought this, when the Plain Dealer nudged the press out of business in 1982, June of 1982. And then in the subsequent years, the Plain Dealer added the newsroom staff and support staff. The people who were employed in the newsroom at the Plain Dealer grew to, I think, about 450.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now that's down. I don't know what it is, but it's under 100. Pretty dramatic.
So this is a follow-up question to that. Where is journalism headed? Are there any ways to improve the finances of the daily newspaper, or do we really need to beef up the online presence?
I think there's a unanimity around the view that online is, I'm a dinosaur in that I also get the New York Times in my driveway, along with the Plain Dealer, but to get the New York Times in your driveway now is over $100 a month. And that is a lot of money for a newspaper. I think the future is online, but in Cleveland, they're trying to do both. And the Plain Dealer prints a lot of other daily newspapers, by the way, and I assume that's good for business. Have I lost anyone?
Yeah, you lost me.
Okay, now you're back.
I'm back. And I may have, I didn't look like I didn't lose my questions. Okay, let's see here. Did you finish answering that question?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Every once in a while I lose my thing. This is a change in subject, but with McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, will Biden's first term be any different than Obama's second term.
Remember what he said when Obama was elected, that his sole job was to obstruct the
Yeah.
Obama administration every step of the way.
Right.
I think we're at a moment in time where I don't think that would be acceptable. I think that I'm fairly certain that Mitch McConnell will be the Senate, will retain power, but I think at least for a while, I'm cautiously optimistic that there will be an attempt, because, there will be an attempt to get things done. But I also don't, I think when the history of Donald Trump will include that it will not be kind to his enablers. And there are many of them. I would count Rob Portman as one of his enablers. And so I think it remains to be seen, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Oh, good. This is just a follow-up about the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine required radio and TV stations to present both sides on key issues, and Reagan ended that in the 1980s.
Okay.
Well, I think what originally wasn't the airwaves belonged to the federal government, they belonged to the people. They didn't belong to individual corporations, right?
Right, but they're regulated by the FCC, which is different than newspapers.
Right. So Biden is the second Catholic president, but it seems like Catholics and Christians have been less willing to support him than they did JFK. Why?
Well, the evangelical thing is something that I have been unable to get my head around. Their support for him, because I don't have to run through the litany of his personal failings and outstanding allegations of sexual abuse that are still out there against the credible allegations. I think, I think the abortion issue is, and Donald Trump, no more. His history is filled with writing checks to Planned Parenthood, as we all know. But people have, the evangelicals and a lot of Catholics have twisted themselves in a pretzel in an attempt to justify their support for a guy who has probably trampled a minimum of 8 of the 10 commandments on a regular basis. No, that's above my pay grade understanding that, but.
Yeah, really.
Pardon me?
I said, really, I know, who knows? I think it must be something about like TV personality as opposed to, anyway. So here's another question for you. Yeah. Do you think this so-called republic could become an autocracy given the wide support for a demagogue like Trump?
Well, there was a lot of talk about that. And I think as I mentioned when I rambled on at the beginning, that I think Joe Biden's election may have slowed that, and hopefully it put an end to it. But you can read a lot of thoughtful people who are a lot more who are a lot better students of history, and a lot of deep thinkers in this country think the age of American exceptionalism is in decline. I generally tend to agree with that, and I'm not too sure where we're headed, but I think the authoritarianism thing, Trump his mind isn't organized, and he's not thoughtful enough to pull something like that off, it seems to me. He's too chaotic in his thinking.
Although he seems to have some pretty broad thinking people under him who got because he was an autocrat. All the environmental regulations that got eliminated, and
Stephen Miller's of the world, you mean? Right?
Yeah. So here's a question similar vein, this election appears to be a repudiation of Trump and not an endorsement of the Democratic platform. The health of our democracy will rest on rebuilding the public good, yet voters have rewarded election and re-election to individuals who do not seem to value that. If you were a politician, how would you frame the message so it might be heard?
I think you would just have to, I think, number one, I agree with everything that person wrote. And I think you need to be willing to put what's right ahead of what your political, the people in your, you have to be willing to be a one-termer. And I know few people in either party who are willing to do that. And I was greatly, look, I think Mike DeWine is at his heart, a decent guy. As a human being, he is a much more decent guy than his predecessor. I can say that with absolute certainty. But, you know, they get tugged. People like DeWine have been tugged. He signed off on this potentially super spreader event in Toledo about 3 weeks ago because they get tugged away from what they really believe by the politics of it all. And, you know, he knows he can't win a second term if he has the, you know, a lot of people on the far right already despise him for suggesting that maybe people should wear a mask.
Right, right. So are we in an era of identity politics where Trump is a symbol of whiteness to many lower income whites who nurse grievances against people?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and I addressed that, and I think we are in part, sure. I think that is I don't want to ascribe a percentage of what part of his base that constitutes, but it's not small.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the only president of my life, in my lifetime, and probably anyone's lifetime, who is consistently refuses to denounce people who are openly extremists and QAnon and neo-Nazis, and you know, the whole Charlottesville experience is really frightening.
We all know that parts of Ohio have suffered tremendous economic and job loss. How important is the Republican-Democrat divide on guns, abortion, and race in Ohio? And can people's opinions of these issues ever be changed or healed?
No,
Common ground.
the gun issue is something that just astonishes me, and that's not going away. You know, the governor signed as a lawyer, was attorney general for 8 years. He signed an abortion bill that he knew was unconstitutional. You know, I don't, of the money I give away, the single biggest beneficiary of my generosity, if that's the right word for it, is a group called Sandy Hook Promise. And they have, you know, everyone knows, I'm sure, what the origins of that group. And ever since that slaughter in that school, I'm not even sure how long ago it was now. It's been almost a decade. They raise a lot of money and unfortunately haven't been able to accomplish a lot. Guns and abortion, and you know, among a certain segment of the electorate, the gay issue is not a thing of the past. And we'll see if that, you know, the Supreme Court could still deal a setback to gay rights at some point down the line, given its present makeup.
Mm-hmm. So this is going back to media. CBS, NBC, and ABC all cut away from the middle of Trump's news conference on November 5th, when he said that the Democrats were trying to steal the election from him, rigging ballot counting, etc. Why have journalists and news media continued to cover Trump's press conferences lies so much in the past when he blatantly lied and not cut him off?
What?
Or was it an overstep on the part of the government, or on the part of the journalists when they cut him off?
He's the president. And I think there have been a lot of suggestions that the media had its thumb on the scale. It's had its thumb on the scale for 4 years. Maybe even, it's been maybe even more obvious in the last 4 months that they used, I see the word lie, I believe, in either today or yesterday was above the fold in the New York Times on the front page. I'm of two minds of that. They cut him off because all he was doing was lying. And that, when was it? Thursday night, I believe. And I think the media, if the media has been, well, he is a liar. He has lied 23, 24, 25,000 times in a little bit less than 4 years. And I think the media is trying to preserve, if the media has had its thumb on the scale, I think it's for the right reason.
Why that moment and not others would be interesting, but
That's a fair question.
so we regularly heard commentators talk about the norms that Trump broke. Has too much of our governance been left to the reliance on norms? And if so, how do we codify those values? We need more laws, I guess.
Well, I don't think abject cruelty is generally, that's a fair question about, are we too reliant? But this guy has engaged in cruelty and falsehoods, and that's so far beyond the norm of what's acceptable or should be acceptable from our government and its leaders, that's beyond the pale. That's just not outside the norms.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to have a rule about making fun of, say, a disabled reporter.
Yes.
I mean, it's just common sense. You don't do that, right?
Never paid a price for that, did he? That was 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
No. Mm-mm. Well, Trump has been defeated. Trumpism will continue. How deep is the Trump worldview among GOP voters?
Well, isn't that a good, that's a great, I think he will still command a sizable following. And I don't know who, there's going to be this big brawl now, I anticipate, about inheriting the Trump mantle. And there are, let's pick a number, 20% of the electorate will do and support, do what he suggests they do and support. There's been so much made of him saying he could shoot somebody and people would stay with him, but there is an element of truth to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we prepared for misinformation coming from Russia and China, from Russia and China and BUGG-TV, I don't know what that is. It seems that most of the misinformation came from domestic sources. It seems news organizations are more important than ever because they work to check sources and truthfulness of what they publish. How can we support legitimate news?
Well, in an era of social media, I mean, newspapers, that's a legitimate argument that newspapers make, that on social media, you don't get real news. You get this distorted, and you get other governments get in. Now, having said all that, we were warned in advance of all these terrible things that might happen in this election. to influence the outcome, and for the most part, it appears that they did not materialize.
So I realize it's a bit early, but the GOP hopefuls in 2024 who might they be? Tom Cotton, Don Jr., Nikki Haley, Marco Rubio, Larry Hogan.
Hogan's out.
Okay.
He's too normal. Who we missed? Pompeo, Don Jr. Apparently, I've seen at least one poll where the runaway leader is Tucker Carlson. You've heard that? I've heard and read a lot about that. That Donald Trump, I mean, the president could run again in 4 years, although it's difficult to imagine that, but he would be 78. I always thought that during the campaign, every time you would see Biden, he would always be in a hurry and he would run upstairs. He did it last night. He ran onto the stage and he would run up the airplane steps every single time he got in an airplane. And that was just an attempt to, number one, offset this Trump obsession with saying that suggesting Biden is diminished, and to offer a contrast with Trump, who seems to have at times have a hard time negotiating stairs. But so who knows what's going to happen in 4 years?
I think even more important, are the Democrats growing any new leadership who could maybe be president next time?
I don't know. It will be interesting to watch the Harris thing because voters are, I think November 3rd proved that, you know, the word socialism still scares the heck out of a majority of voters, maybe a sizable majority. And, you know, defunding the police was something that I don't know who it was that allowed that to become part of the Democratic vocabulary, but it was a huge mistake.
It was like sticking a hornet's nest with a stick, you know?
Oh, yes, cannot. And if you read, there's an interview with AOC in this morning's Times where she is not giving any ground. And the person with the second hardest job in Washington come January is probably going to be Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
Keeping her caucus together may prove to be impossible.
Yeah, how you convince the far left progressives to stop using inflammatory language? Their ideas can stay the same, but even different language would make it more acceptable.
Yes, there's something about her I really admire. However,
oh, she's great. Yeah, but
yes, exactly. Yeah,
I love her. I'd have her in charge, but no.
Yes.
Let's see. The Trump campaign is blasting out texts and emails for donations to fight what they're calling a stolen election and voter fraud. Given so many partisan judicial appointees, is there any likelihood that they can successfully prevail in court to throw out or disqualify Biden votes to the point where Trump wins? I
think it's highly unlikely. I think it's next to impossible. They have no evidence, so far. They have some manufactured evidence, and I want to believe that at the end of the day, what Trump would, I think in his fairy tale mind, he would like to get some type of a major issue related to the election before the Supreme Court, and because he feels that they owe him and they would all vote his way. And I am not so cynical that I believe that yet. I think that they would not rule his way. So I don't think the courts are going to change anything.
This year, Colorado became the first state to allow voters to decide whether or not to dump the Electoral College, Proposition 113. The compact can't take effect until enough states with 270 electoral college votes or more agree to join the compact. Do you think we'll ever get rid of the electoral college? Do you think that is a good idea to get rid of the electoral college?
I don't know if we'll ever get rid of it. I've never been one who has given a lot of thought to it. It's not, there's still a path for Democrats to win the presidency. What bothers Democrats, let me flip that, is that they win the popular vote every time. They've won it in like 7 out of the last 8 elections they've won. The only exception being 2004, when Bush did get more votes than Kerry. But in 7 of the last 8 elections, the Democrat has gotten more votes, but there's still a need. The flip side of that is, look at the Republicans would say, wait a minute, you start with California and New York in your back pocket. So you start this thing, ahead, what's the number, 80-0? I'm not obsessed with it. I don't think it will happen anytime soon.
Right. Cleveland is on the list to be one of the nation's most vulnerable to damage from COVID-19 due to job losses, loss of tax money from people working at home, and unemployment.
Yes.
In your opinion, can Cleveland recover if COVID-19 is brought under control?
I don't know. I really worry about that. I think I went downtown every work day for over 40 years. And even after I retired, I went down at least once or twice a week. And I was downtown for the 3rd time since March 15th, last week. And you have no trouble, finding a parking spot. And I worry about all these people coming back. My son works at 9th and Euclid, and he's been to the office in the PNC building 3 times since then. And businesses are figuring out they don't need all that office space. And
Right.
you have one of the things that, you have about 25,000 people living in or near downtown now, and have all these restaurants, which I heard are really suffering. I really worry about, because Cleveland's come back, as places like Cleveland, this comeback of downtown, it's going to be fragile, and it is fragile. And I think we have a mayoral election coming up, and I think you can easily argue it's the most important mayoral election in at least 30 years.
How about, are there any Ohio Democrats besides Sherrod Brown who could win a statewide election in Ohio?
Problematic. It's harder for Democrats in even number in the years like 2022 and 2018. It's harder for Democrats in non-presidential years because the turnout model changes. And Portman is up in 2 years, as is Mike DeWine. Those are the 2 signature races. It's not impossible, given the economy. If the economy is still in the tank, yes, anything can happen. And I wrote today of the 3 most likely candidates you will read or hear about for those 2 jobs are Mayor of Dayton, Nan Whaley, and Mayor of Cincinnati, a fellow named John Cranley, and Tim Ryan, who is, from the Mahoning Valley, whose district runs all the way over into Summit, and who got 52% of the vote on Tuesday. And in a district where he has regularly gotten about 60 or 65, and he was running against a wacko. Republican opponent by the name of Christina Hagan, who is in her time in the legislature would best be described as controversial. She was the author of the heartbeat bill. So it is Brian, Cranley, Whaley. Those are the names you will hear the most, and we will know within the next 3 or 4 months who the candidates for governor and senate are going to be.
Right, right. How likely do you think it is that Trump will launch his own news network after his eviction from the Oval White House?
He's going to have to find a way to pay about what, $400 million in personally guaranteed loans that are coming due. I don't rule it out. He has no loyalty to anyone or anything. And I shudder to say this. I think it could be a worthwhile business venture on his part. Who knows? I think it's possible. Somebody else would have to fund it because he does everything with other people's money.
Well, I think he could probably find people. He always has, hasn't he?
I agree. Yeah.
And he's mad at Fox News right now. So.
Yeah, he's mad at Fox News, right?
Good point. Jean Martin, maybe you have some questions that I'm not seeing in the list that you suggested I look for?
There was a question from someone asking, Biden is the second Catholic president, but it seems Catholics and Christians have been less willing.
We did that.
We did ask that one. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I got down the whole list.
The answer was so boring, you fell asleep.
No.
Well, I was wondering, did we want to see if anybody in the audience has a question? Who's not interested in typing it up because it's work to type up a question.
Brent, I have a question. Can we revisit the big issue of misinformation? Is there any answer to, I mean, Trump says lies and his supporters believe him, and the media like Fox News repeats it, and it becomes true in their universe. And I think there are lots of ways that happens. Is there any defense against that?
No, well, I don't. What isn't a defense, it seems to me, isn't Twitter labels now, and I don't know if Facebook, they slap labels on objectionable claims. Doesn't deter his followers still believe it. Yeah. Jack Dorsey could put as many tags on a tweet, but I do think that his Twitter following might drop off a little bit, but I don't know.
In general, we read things on the internet, and we don't have a ministry of information to tell us whether it's true or false. And so we have to use some kind of judgment and discernment. But some people seem not to have that talent very well.
And therein lies the great danger of social media. Now, the Republicans and both sides think that Facebook discriminates against them, and maybe that's something they'll get together on, but will be interesting to see how Biden tries to wades in on that too, but it's not going anywhere.
Debbie, did another question come in?
Yes, has fact checking been effective? I think you kind of answered that, really, didn't you? It's like you have to read fact checks to
exactly, and all the plain dealer has done some good stuff on that, and the Washington Post has done a lot of, the 25,000 lies that they have documented they're all in and of itself, they are their own little fact checks. And that didn't stop 71 million people from voting for him.
Right.
So,
Jean, you have anything else?
Sorry. I'd like to know a little bit about your background. How is it to go from being a reporter to a columnist?
Hmm.
Well, I was a columnist in the 80s, late 80s. And if you want to know the unvarnished truth is, when newspapers started to struggle, and I'm speaking generally here, in the late 2000s, like, between 2005 and 2010, they decided we have to get people off our payroll, and we're still making enough money, so we will make them an offer they can't refuse. And so the Plain Dealer was one of the leaders in making people offers they couldn't refuse, and there's extraordinarily generous buyout packages. And I took it because it was, like I said, an offer I couldn't refuse. And a lot of people left the payroll then. And there was a woman who was the editor at the time. Her name is Susan Goldberg, probably rings a bell with some of you. And she asked me if I wanted to, write a column, and she would pay me to write a column. And so that's what happened. I left because I was in my, mid 60s, and they treated me for retirement purposes if I was in my mid 70s.
But if you look at the job of the reporter and the job of the columnist, how are they different, and how is you had been a reporter first, right? Before
I was a reporter for 18 years, and then I was a columnist for 4. Then I was an editorial page director for.
Yeah. So how is the reporter different than a columnist?
Pardon me?
How is the job of reporter different than
Well, I like to do a lot of reporting and talk to people and quoting people in my column. The best job I've ever had is being a reporter. And in this most fun I've ever had in journalism was probably being a reporter in the 70s when Cleveland pretty much went to hell. But as you know, we had a mayor for 2 years who was on the front page of the New York Times once a week, and we had desegregation, and we had enormous white flight, and 70s was the worst decade in the city's history by far. But being a reporter is still the highlight of my career.
But as a reporter, your job was different than a columnist. Is it because you had to keep your opinion out of it? Is that correct?
You have to keep what out? I'm sorry.
Your opinion out of it. It's like you're doing facts.
Yeah, but you can still do a lot of reporting in your column. You understand? Follow me?
I do. Yeah.
I went down to Piketon and for a day and a half about a month ago, which is down on the river, and became a reporter again and wrote about it because they have a nuclear waste problem down there that's poisoning children, perhaps. And being a reporter is the best part of journalism, and any editor would also tell you that.
Almost half of the, this is funny, almost half of the electorate voted for a sociopath. Is there a way to view this more positively?
No.
Say they voted for someone who stands for the common man?
Yeah, you can say that, but yeah, I'm very bothered by the fact that more than 70 million people voted for him.
What I have a question is, you interviewed all those people about their radioactive waste that was maybe causing health problems. Yet those same people probably voted for Trump, who eliminated environmental standards. Do you have a sense of how that works?
There's a woman down there who has a PhD, and I spent a lot of time. She's from there, and she drove me through town. I tried to look the other way as we passed the houses with the Confederate flags out front, because I did think we were still north of the Mason-Dixon line. But But she put it to me, she just volunteered that people down in that part of Ohio vote against their economic interests. And
Right.
we've seen that not in just in Appalachia, Ohio, it's happened everywhere in this country. The tax cut bill wasn't designed, it was the biggest lie told during the Trump administration, I
Mhm.
think, was that that bill was designed to help the middle class. It was designed to help corporations and the wealthy. And that's who it did, you know. It's great for the stock market. Wasn't very good for anybody in Piketon.
Did you feel as you drove around with her that people saw her as one of them, or did they see her even though she was from
No,
there?
this person is extremely popular. Yeah, that's a great question though, because she is maybe the biggest vote getter on their village council.
Right. So somehow it's little people, it's people like that who maybe can try to change this rural heartland around a little bit by helping them understand their best interests.
This is a woman, her name is Jennifer Chandler, and she is from there, and she doesn't rule out leaving sometime, but she's in middle age now, and she fights for these people every single day of her life.
At the local government level.
Yes,
Yeah.
and these people, yeah. And she doesn't have to. She could go somewhere to Cincinnati or somewhere, but she is committed to them.
Mm-hmm.
And she may have a master's from Ohio U, not a PhD, but she still considers herself part of that region. And
Right.
that's good for her.
Well, that's a skill, because
Yeah.
sometimes that degree knocks you out of the community.
Yes, right.
But we need people like her to
Yes, we do. Yeah.
goes into those Republican heartlands. Without the Fairness Doctrine, don't we face a world in which people have lived hermetically sealed bubbles in which they hear only the news they agree with?
Yes, we did. And that's, yeah, yes. And that's Fox News.
Mm-hmm. But no changing it, obviously. Yeah. So
No.
yeah. Well, Jean, I think I'm sort of out of questions.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jean.
I actually have a couple more that just slipped in here.
Okay.
We'd ask them.
Sure.
Some don't realize that legitimate news requires fact-checking by editors and producers. In the case of TV, is it a hopeless battle to get those who buy into conspiracies and unsubstantiated news to learn the difference between fact-based news and fact news? Or has lack of education and or the prevalence of social media made this an insurmountable task? Does that make sense, what I've just said?
So it makes perfect sense. And I think the person asked it and then answered it, but asked it with the first part and then answered it with the second part. Social media makes it almost impossible to people they cannot be convinced that they're wrong. They get this stuff in their head and they believe everything Donald Trump tells them.
Mm-hmm.
Frightening.
Last question here. Politicians talk about helping the middle class. It seems to me that the poor are the people who need the help. What do you think? And I'm going to just add something onto this. Like, what happened to the American notion of pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps and being self-reliant? And is that part of the problem with this helping poor people?
Giving people a chance is not necessarily a handout, and I'm not sure this is the right way to answer. I think the most important investment we could make in the poverty-stricken parts of Greater Cleveland is universal preschool for all 3-year-olds and all 4-year-olds. Community leaders have decided to top heavy that, to invest at the end of the cycle with scholarships. That's good too. But you just invest in ways that level the playing field and gives kids a way out, an opportunity to break the cycle of poverty that has held this community back now for what, 70 years, 60
Mhm.
years?
Well, how do we convince people that education is a value?
We're having, in some, I don't know.
Because, you know, I mean, there's education where there's, you know, high school, college degree, all that stuff, and there's education where you learn skills. I mean, it seems to me that, you know, we need to value skills as well as education. But what happens when even the parents don't really care if their kids do well in school?
And that's a problem too.
Or you're taking their culture away from them by sending them to school. You know, you send your child to the college and it takes away their God and their, you know, their traditional way of doing things.
Yeah, it's not, and it's really not a racial thing. It is an economic, and it's part of what is ingrained in your lifestyle. And I wish I had the answer.
Right.
Sorry.
No, you're not. No one has that answer, but yeah.
That sounds like a good way to close.
Okay, well,
Debbie,
thank all of you.
thank you so much, Brent. It's always fun to have you. And
Okay,
Debbie,
Thank you.
thank you for your great Q&A. Really appreciate it.
yeah, she's terrific. Maybe next time it'll be in person. Huh?
I hope so. Well, next Sunday, we're going to have another Zoom forum. It'll be on another timely topic, the 2020 presidential election. What happened? Find out what role did COVID-19, economic uncertainty, grassroots activism, protest, gerrymandering, super PACs, and other issues play in this election. Our speaker will be Tom Sutton, political science professor, Baldwin Wallace University, and director of the Community Research Institute. At 11, we invite you to join our virtual service. You can go to uucleveland.org and click on the panel, our next virtual service. The topic today is all together now, reconciliation. And we'll have a wonderful music program featuring the music of Duke Ellington, an African-American spiritual, with our congregants and the chancel choir. Both the services and this are recorded and accessible from the links on our website. Wayne, do you have anything to add?
No, that's about it. That was a great job. Thank you, Brent. It was terrific to hear your ideas and thoughts on these matters, and we look forward to having you back again in the future.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you folks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.